What's poppin', internet? It's your friendly neighborhood interweb slinger from the north, Quick Cold Clips here. And before I break this down, I'm doing this commentary with the notion that you've already seen the Spider-Man movies. That's Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and the Tom Holland movies, including the newest Spider-Man film, SpiderMan No Way Home. So heavy spoiler warnings here. I'll give you a second to click out of the vid and come back later if you haven't seen it yet. Okay, cool. I want to start this video off by saying that I'm an absolutely huge, and I mean huge, Spider-Man fan. And until now, I hadn't been the biggest fan of the MCU variation of Spider-Man. Although I still enjoyed the movies, I saw them as inferior to both Tobey, the classic awe-inspiring Spider-Man from my childhood, who will always be my favorite, and Andrews, the edgy and quick-witted Spider-Man from my teens. That's not to say that actor Tom Holland did a bad job at all. It's more about the direction the MCU was going with the character. Spider-Man in the MCU was originally introduced in Civil War and was depicted as nothing more than a confused, starry-eyed fanboy of Iron Man that Tony Stark himself recruited. Iron Man was everything he wanted to be, and because of Stark's inclusion to the MCU Spider-Man's brand, he overshadowed his character entirely. Besides my problem with Stark taking the place of Uncle Ben, it was Peter essentially winning the lottery by being given a suit by a world-famous hero and celebrity, showing up at his crib, then being given an iron nanotech suit, and on top of that being given access to billions of dollars worth of Stark tech, while also whining about how hard his life was because he couldn't chill and play with Lego with his friend Ned, enjoy prom, or just relax on his vacations with MJ. That didn't sit right with me. It felt like a spoiled modern millennial version of Spidey I just couldn't relate to. It just wasn't what Spider-Man was. And yes, I know the Spider-Man was affected by the snap and was in the Avengers, but that's besides the point. I grew up in an era where being Spider-Man came with immense sacrifice, and I watched the Tobey version of the character depressed, broke, and forever worrying about his widowed aunt in a bummy apartment where he always owed rent, with the love of his life fed up of his bullshit, and his best friend hating his guts. There was no $1 million check, no private jets, and no emergency backup buttons to call Iron Man. Just hand-stitched spandex, a mask, and a responsibility to do the right thing. Similarly, as a teen, I watched the Andrew Garfield version of Spider-Man lose Uncle Ben, fall in love, do the right thing by stepping away from that love in order to abide the wishes of the woman of his dreams' father, only to eventually fall even more in love with her while still trying to do right, and eventually having her dragged into his problems in his double life, inevitably dying in his arms and leaving him in anguish and sorrow. Both in the comics and films, being Spider-Man has always been about sacrifice. It's about doing the right thing, no matter what the cost, and no matter what you lose. It's about getting up over and over again, no matter how many times you're slammed, beaten, zapped, broken. And to quote Spider-Man 2, it's being steady, giving up even the things that you want the most, even your dreams, all for the greater good of others. Up until now, the MCU version of Peter Parker depicted a good kid who wanted to do the right thing, but one who came off as goofy and sort of a spoiled trust fund baby. Given lots of gadgets to play with by a celebrity mentor, his powers coming off as nothing more than an inconvenience from doing what he actually wanted to do. Having very little fighting ability in terms of technical skill, he rarely ever threw punches, relying predominantly on webs and tech. He had the powers, Stark jets on speed dial, vacays to Europe with his girlfriend, and Aunt May's approval, all while saving the world with the other heroes, and he was given all the gadgets and goobers to do so. This Peter was Iron Boy. I'm happy to say that all changed in Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home turned the MCU's Peter Parker from Iron Boy into Spider-Man, skillfully resetting the character while not erasing the positive things about his prior role in the MCU and masking his previous goofy experiences as learning ones that could lead into him being the hero that we know and love from the comics. Now look, whether they saw the critiques on their Spider-Man in the MCU and decided to make a change, or this was the plan all along, I have no idea, but the point is, I'm going to point out how they changed this character and gave him plot development and character development that really turned him into Spider-Man. Okay, so number one. So the first thing that No Way Home does is it establishes that this is not an Iron Boy Jr. film. They do this by immediately starting where Far From Home left off, immediately putting Peter into a situation where his identity is revealed. The situation is dire, and for once in the franchise, Peter is not asking what would Iron Man do, looking at Iron Man murals or hearing his voice for guidance. This immediately stuck out, as prior to this film, Peter mentioned Iron Man whenever he had an issue. The film also cut out the previous AI voice Karen in Peter's suit that resembled Iron Man's Jarvis and Friday. You only hear AI say one thing from the suit in the entire film, and it doesn't have a personality either. It's mainly just for like continuity purposes. This was a wise correction, as the Iron Man comparison was painfully blatant with the suit AI from Spider-Man Homecoming. So number 2. The second thing that No Way Home accomplished was less clumsy web fights for comedic relief and more actual Spider-Man combat. Finally, the MCU Spider-Man threw punches and actually had to fight tooth and nail for his life. The inclusion of Andrew and Tobey Spider-Man villains in this movie allowed Willem Dafoe's ruthless Green Goblin into the MCU, providing Peter with real stakes and real fights to the death. There's a scene in the film at Happy's apartment where Goblin was just beating the bricks out of MCU Peter, and it was reminiscent of the 2002 fight brutality of the Tobey era. It was an amazing and much needed change of tone to see a lack of clumsy jokes and accidents, and finally the dark and brutal side of being Spider-Man within the MCU. Tom Holland's Spider-Man fighting abilities had yet to be properly shown in the MCU, and the fact they paid attention to this helped solidify the seriousness of the character. Spider-Man is one of the greatest fighters in all of the Marvel Universe, and to see him finally throw hands in the MCU and fight like he's supposed to, it was great to see, man. The man threw hands, he was getting beat down, but he was getting back up, throwing those hands, and we needed that from the MCU Peter Parker. The third thing that No Way Home accomplished was on-screen tragedy. Up until now, apart from Tony Stark's death, we had never seen the MCU's Peter mourn a tragic close-to-home loss due to murder he failed to prevent. It was implied, but never shown. Lots of people were fine with this, but I wasn't. Every on-screen Spider-Man needs that tragic moment of a death close to home and wanting revenge on the one who killed that beloved person. We had it with both Tobey and Andrew's interpretation, and in this film, we finally got it with Tom Holland's interpretation of Spider-Man as well. He loses his Aunt May after she's murdered by the original Green Goblin, and the tone is no longer about how fun it is being on the Avengers or how much he wants to be like Iron Man, but how being specifically Spider-Man and living two separate lives comes with massive suffering and burden. This is a big part of what it's always meant to be Spider-Man, and until No Way Home, it had been missing from the MCU version. Lastly, as well as the other two Spider-Man being present for the grand finale and giving him their blessing not only in the plot, but in a meta way for fans as well, what really solidified the MCU's Peter Parker in No Way Home is sacrifice. At the end of the film, when the Spider-Man redeem the villains, effectively saving them so none of them have to die, in order to save the fabric of their reality, Peter's sacrifice is being known by everyone. His best friend, the love of his life, his fellow superhero comrades, Happy, everyone. Everyone forgets him. At the end of the film, he's all alone. He's in a beat-down apartment with an asshole landlord, and he's back to sewing and stitching his own suit. No Tony Stark tech, no private jets, no friends, no girl, no Avengers, no ways out. Just power and responsibility. And at the end of the film, as he swings into the night in his spandex to face the world once again, a new era of Spider-Man was born. The film may have been called No Way Home, but this movie was Spider-Man's homecoming to a new generation, to the fans' hearts, and to the MCU, finally embodying what the character Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is all about. It's been your friendly neighborhood interweb slinger from the north, Quick Code Clips here. Like, comment, and subscribe if you guys like the video, man. I really appreciate you guys. I hope you're having a splendid day or night wherever you are. Be on the lookout for more Quick Code content. And until next time, I want you all to stay up and stay cool. Alright, later.